Welcome to yet another episode of Nerds at Night. I'm Tolly.
And I'm non-lethal.
And tonight we'll be getting back into our gaming roots. We decided we'll talk about a particular genre of gaming, and we might do a couple more of these, but we're going to start with RPGs.
Yes, the good old role-playing game.
That's right. But before we do, there's something that we posted up on Twitter recently, a little bit of a milestone that we've achieved only less than 10 episodes in. We've been marked as new and noteworthy in iTunes.
Yeah, which we are very, very excited about. It's a very good achievement for us. It means that we've got some good listeners out there, and hopefully this will get some more people involved with the community.
That's right. You guys, you listeners, have been crucial to us getting there, I believe, and we just wanted to take a few moments out to thank you very much for listening, for getting involved on Facebook. I see a lot of comments on our posts, a lot of likes out there, and we're starting to get a few views through Twitter and everything like that, and we really appreciate your support, guys.
Yeah, we made this podcast for you guys, and we really wouldn't be here without the people listening to us, so thank you very, very much from both Tolly and myself.
That's right. Now enough of that touchy-feely crap. RPGs and why they suck because they're bollocks.
Why they suck or why they are amazing.
Yes. No, the thing I said because you're wrong.
No, the thing I said because you are objectively wrong.
This hurts me. Why? Let's get into it. All right. Well, how do we want to play this? Do you want to talk about a particular game, or do we just want to approach the individual systems that you find in RPGs?
I think we can go with the systems, and we can talk about we can use games as examples, and we can rant and rave and go one side and the other about specific games, sort of using the systems as examples. So, the system, what defines an RPG to you, Tolly?
Well, it says on the box, this is an action role-playing game. No, seriously. To me. Nearly anything could kind of be classed as an RPG, but to me, I think it's when a game in particular is being crafted to try and make you live through that character specifically. And most people will think of it as leveling systems and being able to pick a class and skill up and all that sort of nonsense. It's sort of the Elder Scrolls kind of thing. But I'll go this far that the 100% common element to nearly every RPG is a leveling system.
Yeah, you're right. Classes are important. Hopefully we'll talk about classes later on, but yeah, leveling system. Every RPG, in my opinion, an RPG, you sort of hit it on the head there, is when you are playing the role of a person, and most games are like that. But what sets a real RPG apart from a regular game is the ability to level up and make choices for your character. So it's not just you're living out a predefined script, but you're writing the script as you go along, sort of thing. So you're right. Leveling system would make an RPG.
Yeah, so one of the most common leveling systems is simply that you kill something or you complete a quest and you get a certain amount of experience, and that all piles into a little jar, and once your jar fills up, you get a level up and you go ding grats.
Yeah, and then you get given a choice sometimes, or just a predetermined set of abilities to go along with your new level, and that is the RPG experience.
So that, to me, it's been around for a long, long time now in nearly every RPG and even in some non-RPGs. Do you find that that's getting a bit old now? I preface everything I say by reminding people that I don't have all the answers, despite being completely right, and no one can argue with me. Leveling system's been around for a long time. Is it time we try and find something new to help indicate increased experience, whether it not necessarily be how many things you killed, but perhaps how long you've played? Or should the game try and measure your level of skill? As you play a game, you get better and better. You don't simply just get bigger numbers and do better. You actually improve at the game. Could they measure that, perhaps?
Well, there's a few different actual systems out there, leveling systems out there, which we could talk about. And there's the ones which I sort of say give choice, and the ones that give the illusion of choice. And you've got your sort of things like your more or less like World of Warcraft. When you level up, you get a predetermined set of abilities that always come along at a set level. So you gain new spells and new attacks or whatever, but it's the same for every single other person there. And then you've got games like, for example, Skyrim, where you have to use a particular skill. Like if you're using swords, you level up in swords and you get better and better and do more damage with them the more you use them. But then you also can put points in how you choose to become better with swords. But I've also toyed around in my mind the idea of, and I think I've mentioned this to you before, a levelless system, which has yet to be used, to my knowledge, because it's, to be perfectly blunt, I find it really hard to sort of implement that kind of system.
Well, that could be the thing. There could be technical challenges around implementing such a system. I find it interesting, the system you've mentioned in Skyrim, not having played it very much. It sounds to me like a lot better way of doing it, because then that allows you to craft your character uniquely, and it's more akin to how you'd perhaps skill up in the real world. I know a game like Skyrim isn't exactly going for real world realism, what with the dragons and whatnot, but the fact that, you know, in real life you only get better at something by doing that something or learning about that something. It's not just, you know, I spent 5 minutes outside kicking chickens and my two-handed skill has increased. So I think that is possibly a better way of doing it. I don't really agree anymore with just go out and kill things and then suddenly you get better at everything, because it just seems like a really simplistic way of measuring skill increase and improvement for your unique character, because you might level up through, say, World of Warcraft, our old workhorse, through doing trade abilities like picking herbs or something like that, and you'll get up to level 90 and you'll be just as strong as the guy who got up to level 90 by going out and killing things and taking on epic quests and being the hero of the land. And that to me just doesn't seem very representative of a good system where the choices you're making and the things you're deciding to do within that game matter. You're not playing a role, you're just sort of shoving that character along to get to the same endpoint that everyone else will.
Yeah, I do agree with you there, and that's why I do like the sort of Skyrim and to a lesser extent the Elder Scrolls Online leveling system, but it is a difficult system, in my opinion, to implement in an MMO environment. Like, keep on using Skyrim as an example, like there are perks that you can unlock within each skill and each perk that you can get. Like, for example, if you want to learn how to decapitate someone when you power attack them with a sword, you need to have a skill of, let's say, 60 in one-handed swords. And the only way to get a skill of 60 in one-handed swords is to keep on using one-handed swords. Whereas your games like your World of Warcraft, like I said, and most other games and MMOs, you could go out and use archery, for example, and just shoot all these hapless rats at a distance, and then all of a sudden you can get better at using a sword or better at using magic, even though you weren't using those things. And it would, as you said, enable you to craft a character exactly how you wanted it, but you would have to play the way you intend to level your character, which is what I really like about that sort of system, as opposed to your generic sort of brand RPGs and your World of Warcrafts and all that sort of thing, which you just, as you said, get a jar of experience, and once it is full, everything gets better.
Yeah, and I mean that's the problem with, I think, a lot of current RPGs, and I understand that it's a technical limitation, is that you do need everyone to be at roughly the same endpoint towards the end, because I don't think, you know, Skyrim is going to have max level dungeons where you need to go in and pick this epic herb because you've decided not to use combat, you've decided to just go through trade skills. But I mean, perhaps in MMOs that is something they could do more of. Simple, and I know World of Warcraft has started doing it. You can level all the way up just using trade skills, and then you can play the Pokemon mini game to your heart's content and never even realize that there's dungeons and end level rating and all that sort of nonsense. So I think that is a system that could work. I just think perhaps it's time to move away from the old archaic leveling systems where you crit monster for 10 points, you get 5 XP, you know, Pikachu is evolving. It's probably about time, especially with next gen, now's a good time to do it, is to add a little bit more depth to these systems so that you can actually craft your own character when playing an RPG.
Yeah, I tend to agree. And like a game which springs to mind, which is not an MMO, the XCOM reboot, which we've mentioned briefly in a previous episode, each character, when they level up, are given a choice of generally 2 abilities, and picking one excludes you from picking the other, and that's a way to craft a character sort of quotation marks uniquely. And I'd like to see that sort of system in an MMO where you have, say, a tree where it starts off with a very few abilities, and when you pick the first ability, it opens up two more, and you can branch out or web down, and you could specialize down one whole area, or you could spread across several areas, and each one would be unique to you. And I think a game which tries to do this and does it semi-successfully is The Secret World, where there are the different weapon trees that you can pick, for lack of a better word, like shotguns, assault rifles, chaos magic, blood magic, etc. And you are allowed to level them up to max, but you can only have a certain number of abilities and passive abilities active at any time, and they have to be unlocked by leveling those skills. So you can craft a unique character eventually, but you have to play using those play styles to get those abilities. So maybe that sort of thing, but not so open-ended. It's hard to say, but I want it, damn it.
The branching structure really sort of helps. I think some games, especially games who are only sort of implementing RPG elements instead of being an RPG, tend to do this really poorly. They offer a skill tree, and I know Infamous did this, and it feels really cheap in some ways that they have skill trees, but it basically only lets you pick between, you know, the good set of skills and the bad set of skills. And this is, you know, karma systems are another topic entirely, but once you pick one way, you're just filling out that tree. So you only make one real choice that matters, and it doesn't even matter because all it is different colors of the same spell at the end. I'm talking Infamous 1 and 2 here. But when it's only a binary choice and you're only really making it once, and everything beyond that is just a continuation of that one choice that is essentially automatic anyway, you're not really implementing RPG elements at all. You're just... If you want people to experience everything the game's got to offer, you're just artificially having to force them to play twice and get all the good skills and then get all the bad skills so they can experience everything the game has to offer, instead of crafting something that is uniquely you and that plays the way that you want to play. So essentially, if you didn't want to use daggers in World of Warcraft or something like that, you could specialize wholly in swords. And you can do that because that's who you are and that's your play style. But you don't really seem to get that in games that are only very shallowly implementing RPG elements.
Yeah, that's a pretty valid point. And we sort of touched on all the points you've raised. Ideally, what we want is a game which lets you actually play a role that is unique to you and build it how you want to be built. And the games out there at the moment sort of fail in one way or another in various ways, and it's the leveling system or other systems within the game. But yeah, games that implement these RPG elements, words, goddamn, it's so frustrating. This topic is really sort of a passion of mine because I really want a game that just like speaks to me on this level, and I'm finding it hard to find one which just lets me be what I want to be.
I think the thing that gets here is, especially with a lot of games that are just implementing RPG elements, is that they're not an RPG. The game isn't trying to make you be that character. In games like Skyrim and even Half-Life to an extent, is the game wants you to pretend you are that person. They want the suspension of disbelief that you are experiencing this epic quest. Whereas something like Infamous or... it's lost me now. Dear Lord. Anyway, something like Infamous or The Last of Us is the other one I was trying to think of. They've done a lot of characterization. They've built up a character and they want you to empathize with that character's journey. They don't want you specifically to feel as though you are Joel or that you are Cole McGrath. They want you to empathize with that character and their plight. So when they're implementing RPG systems, you're not essentially making choices that you would make. You're trying to make choices that they would make based on the characterization you've been given.
That's a very interesting idea, and I hadn't really thought of it from that perspective before, but you are right, where I think suppose it comes down to, as you said, characterization and personalization. If the main character of the game has a name and a face, then you are playing as someone playing that character almost, instead of just playing as you being that character. And things like Skyrim, where your name, gender, race, etc. is not set, that's a lot more simple and easy to sort of fool yourself into those shoes instead of like your Last of Us and Infamous, where you are filling someone else's shoes.
Yeah, and it draws an interesting comparison between games where there's a really tight, restrictive narrative and you're experiencing someone else's journey, as opposed to a game where they're trying to make you have your own journey. And I think that's perhaps what I should have said earlier when I said what what makes a game an RPG. It really is when the game wants you to be that protagonist and they want you to feel something for the characters in this universe as you would as a member of it yourself. For instance, playing through The Last of Us, I empathized with Joel and his struggle with the loss of his daughter and all the struggles that he had coming to terms with taking Ellie around with him and things like that. I never felt anything for Ellie as Joel. I always felt as though, you know, her and Joel have this really tight bond, and I feel for them as a group and the journey they're going through in this harsh environment. I think when you try and I mean, The Last of Us had RPG elements, but it didn't force you to try and make choices for Joel based on what you would do, because if you're in that environment, you would have been one of the first ones dead, because, you know, video gamers suck at real world survivalism.
Yeah, well, more or less. So it sort of really puts you into a camp of you can call them RPGs, but there are really sort of two types of RPGs, where you assume the role of a person within the game, or you put yourself into the game to play a role.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that is potentially subjective. I know a lot of people who played The Last of Us that may well have said, you know what, I am Joel. That is me, and that's the suspension of disbelief that they wanted to have, is they wanted to experience it as though they were Joel. And I mean, there are choices. You can choose your combat style and things like that, but there's a very big choice at the end that I'm not going to spoil because I'm not a jerk. And you don't get to make that choice because you aren't Joel. You're just sort of along for the ride and pushing his buttons. It's like, shoot this guy, punch that guy. But this big choice is taken away from you. It was really contentious at the time for a game that I suppose could essentially be an RPG, even though it's totally not. And it was important, I think, for the developers to make that choice to craft the narrative that they wanted to, because otherwise it would have been a split down the middle, you know, who essentially pulled the trigger and who didn't in this final choice.
That's deep, man. But also, you are a jerk. You're just not a jerk about spoilers. Just wanted to put that very strong clarification out there.
Yes, that's right. You have to choose whether Ellie lives or dies. You don't.
Spoilers.
She dies, you swines.
Well, not having played the game, I can't really comment on that, but yeah, I do know about that because I spoil things for myself on a daily basis. But anyway, it's it really, going back to what we were talking about, the split of RPG, non-RPG, and what classes an RPG, etc. There are some games out there where you do assume roles of people, but even there, I feel like there's a great split and of how you craft a character, and we can use the example of like GTA, for example, versus, let's say, the Deus Ex, latest Deus Ex game. And like the original Deus Ex, the new one, you could craft a character for stealth, for combat, or for whatever, and you could play the game that way. And there is ways to pass most missions or levels in any play style, whether you're sneaking around like a ninja and not killing anyone, or you're just running in guns blazing and dying, or you're talking your way past every guard there is, etc. But then you got your GTA, where you're again playing the role of someone. But,
bullshit.
Well, you get a name, you get a face.
GTA is not an RPG.
You're playing the role of someone within that universe. That is the definition of an RPG.
By that logic, nearly every game would be an RPG.
Yes, that's true.
Unless it's like a puzzle game, like even a side-scrolling adventure. I'm trying to think, something like Broken Sword, some old point-and-click thing you're saying would also be an RPG.
Well, in a way, in a very broad way, and let me finish this thought, that is an RPG technically, because you are playing the role of someone. However, what I think an RPG is you also make choices for the development of that character. So, like in GTA, you play the role of whoever the main character is in your GTA of choice, and you choose how they level and what weapons they use and whether you're going to be buff or a fat guy and who you're going to romance and which cabal you're going to be doing missions for and whatever. But in games like Ghouls and Goblins and all those sorts of games where you're playing the role of a character and it's just a platformer, there's no choices to make apart from when to jump and when to shoot.
Well, I mean, only one GTA is San Andreas, I think, and kind of 5 and kind of 4. Shut up. I don't think the RPG elements really added anything to a game like GTA, and which a game that was traditionally not an RPG. I feel like I need to say that again.
You need to make your point very validly known.
You swine. And a lot of people didn't like that. Especially in San Andreas, all of a sudden you had to, keep your character fit, and like the only way to be able to run a long distance is to not have a fat bastard character and all that sort of stuff. And GTA is a sandbox of toys essentially, but it really seemed to take away from the game, and it was made worse in GTA 4 by the fact you had your cousin ringing up every 5 fucking minutes saying, "Oh mate, do you want to go out bowling?" It's like, no, peace off.
Cousin, let's go bowling.
That's right, let's go to local alley for bowling of pins. It was the most annoying thing in the world, and I understand in some ways they might have been going for the real life aspect, because I don't know about you, but I have people calling me up at all hours asking me to do annoying things, and this is why I specifically don't have friends. But I didn't get that choice in the game. Like, I could have always just ignored him, but like your cousin in that game was so pathetic that I couldn't just let him go.
Yeah, it felt like he was sort of a bit challenged, and if you let him go his own way, he may just like off himself in his apartment in a fit of sadness and grief, just like, "Oh, cousin, we're not to go bowling."
Well, it's either that, or I figured he was, he'd be sitting at home and he'd be like, "The voice is telling me to burn things."
Yes, I must burn things or go bowling.
That's the choice I have most nights. I just sit at home and light things on fire.
And you've never bowled in your life.
Lies. We'll get into this another time.
Yes, another time. We'll get into everything that is broken about you another night.
Nick. Well, you could control my life like an RPG.
But there'd be no options, though.
Go bowling or burn things. It's like a skill tree.
Skill tree. Yeah, your arsonist skill is leveling up.
Anyway, back to GTA.
Back to GTA.
But the issue with that, besides it being annoying, was that some of these people that ring you up and you'd have to be friends with, it was a requirement. Like, you had to keep a certain level of friendliness with them to keep certain perks in the game, which really made it kind of annoying, because every 20 minutes or whatever, you'd have to stop playing the game and go and, take care of your mentally challenged cousin so that you could get a free taxi whenever you wanted. And some things that were actually helpful to gameplay, you really had to go through this tedium to keep up with. And I think that's when adding RPG elements into games that don't really need them just becomes a waste of time and space, really.
Right, I see what you mean, yeah. If the side parts of the game, the actual role-playing parts of the game, affect the actual gameplay of the game in that way, it shouldn't have that sort of greater impact. Like, the choices you make for the character should be just choices, and there's an effect, and that's it. You shouldn't need to maintain something to get a mechanical benefit within a game. Like, if you choose to just walk around shooting people in the face, then you deserve to have be on everyone's wanted poster for the rest of time, instead of just until you go and get your car spray painted.
Yeah, that's right. And if you are going to add RPG elements, either you need to make them a core part of the gameplay and fun, because that's the point of a game, or if they're going to be a side thing, then they need to have non-game breaking impacts, so that if you choose not to go down that line and look after your cousin or whatever it is in any other game, that it shouldn't negatively impact the core game mechanic, which is shooting people in the face.
Yeah, that's right. I completely agree. If it's either got to be all in or out. There's no sort of side street for this. There's no halfway point. And you're completely right in saying San Andreas sort of tried to toe both lines and ended up just falling flat on their face.
Yeah, and I mean, they've kind of fixed it in 5. I won't go too much into that because it's been too long since I played it, so everything I say will be ignorant and wrong. Unlike my opinion on class systems.
And there goes Pandora's box.
See what I did there?
Yeah,
See
yeah.
how smooth that was, and
Ah,
by drawing attention to it, I've made it unsmooth.
that was so smooth. It made me want to shave. I don't even know why that's funny, but it was funny to me.
I'm tearing up a little bit.
Anyway, class systems. This is another system within RPGs. Thoughts.
Bullshit. They are just... I don't understand them. I understand them on a technical level, so I'll preface everything I'm about to say by that. I am a developer. I do get it, but class systems are a joke. I don't see why they still exist in games at all.
And in some bits, I agree with you, but in most other parts, fuck you, you're wrong.
I am not the one who is wrong. You don't know what you're talking about.
I know
you are,
everything
you are
I'm talking
bad
about.
At life.
You're terrible at podcasts.
That's probably true.
Yeah, well, you work with what you got. But look, classes have been in games as long as they've been RPGs.
That's part of the problem.
Well, it's part of what's always been there. People want to play the role of a wizard, they pick the mage. People want to play the role of the sword and board warrior, they pick the fucking fighter.
That's the problem with it, is that you have to pick a thing, and then you're pigeonholing yourself at... You're not even in the game yet, and you've pigeonholed yourself at the start game button. You have to sit there and you have to be the mage, or you have to be the warrior. And what irks me about this is, you know, they try and get a bit of reality. They try and make it similar to a certain reality. And I'm sure, like, if you're trying to play an RPG and you're trying to invest yourself in this universe, I doubt that they put everyone in high school through some sort of bloody aptitude test and then say, well, you will be the village mage. Go over there and that's all you can ever do. And if you touch a sword, it will melt your hand and you'll die horribly because you'll always be bad at sword fighting.
So I think that's fairly pigeonholing and completely incorrect. There are many good RPGs out there that use classes, and in some cases multi-classing, and it works very well. If you want a character that does everything and does everything well, then you're playing the wrong type of game. You just need to go into your console and type in God mode.
But what it should be, it's an RPG, right? So you're supposed to be able to make choices. But you should also be able to change those choices. People don't make one choice and then are forced to live with it forever. They can change their mind. So why am I choosing to be a mage? And then I get halfway through the game and I'll be like, you know what, screw magic. That's shit's for suckers. And decide to pick up a sword. Yes, I will suck with a sword because I've never used one before and all of that. But you could use the Skyrim system where I will suck at swords even though I have infinity magic level and start swinging one and slowly get better at it over time instead of having to go, oh, well, I chose wizard, I'm halfway through the game, I'm sick of wizard, now I have to go back to the start and be a warrior.
Ah, well, the joke's on you, friend, because in Skyrim you can do exactly that, as you said, but also when you first start playing a game, you do technically pick a class, and you pick a certain number of skills which your character is going to be good at. You get bonus levels in those skills to begin with, and it's easier for you to level those skills, and when you do level those skills, it increases your overall level.
I don't mind it so much if you're picking traits. Like, it works fine if you're picking a class in the sense that everyone has talents. So you might have been born and been talented in the arcane arts and not so talented at knowing which end of the sword to use. But you can still learn. Everyone has a capacity to learn. So while you might always be slightly crappier with swords, everyone can pick up a sword.
Yeah, and this is where you can use like a multi-classing system, like let's use Dungeons and Dragons as an example. If you're playing the wizard of the party and you want to start wearing armor and picking up a sword, you take a few levels in fighter and you can start doing that. There's no prevention of you building a character the way you want in a realistic way, because if you start suddenly using a sword and not practicing your arcane arts, other people who purely stay within the arcane arts will get better than you, but you'll be able to use a sword and stuff.
But why then have a classing system at all? It seems to become redundant at that point.
Well, not necessarily. I don't think so at all, because the classes themselves get their own benefits if you stay focused and stick within a class. And if you want to branch out into all classes, you won't get those higher level benefits because you're diversifying instead of being specialized.
But calling it a class then is redundant. So you're just picking a particular type of fighting style. So why call it a class? Why not just say a style of combat. If you stay within the arcane arts for combat, and I mean not only combat applications but healing or things like that, obviously if you focus on that particular skill set instead of class, then obviously you'll be better at it than someone who tries to be a jack of all trades. But at that point, I mean, you're not essentially putting down your magic textbooks and picking up a sword. Maybe you'll try and sort of do both. At that point, you're not two classes, you're just a multi-skilled individual.
But then again, you can also still use classes for that, I think. Like, using, again, my Dungeons & Dragons example, if you start off as, let's say, a wizard and you start casting spells and you want to start picking up a sword, but you want to actually keep being better at spells as you learn to use the sword as well, you can become what's called an Eldritch Knight, where you level both your arcane skills and your fighting ability, but just both go at a slightly lesser pace because you're picking up two different skill sets. Like, those are classes and what's called a prestige class that level up both together and still within a class system.
That to me just still seems redundant. Why then are you still being forced to make that pigeonholing choice at the start of picking a class if it's ultimately irrelevant, because you can really choose to do anything?
Because not your average person who just walks out of his village one day and says, today I'm going to be an adventurer, can suddenly all of a sudden start being an Eldritch Knight. You need to put in the effort to learn how to learn the basics of being a fighter and learn the basics of being a wizard before you can actually go down that path.
Well, then perhaps build that into the system. Build a learning structure into the system, I suppose. Then you're still choosing a class, aren't you? Classes are bullshit. Seriously.
I think you're just proving yourself more and more wrong, dude.
No, because you just have to pigeonhole yourself, and it's crap. And the more I'm thinking about it, the more you have to do it in real life. You pick a friggin' career when you're a kid, and then you're stuck with that bullshit forever.
Well, I don't think that's entirely true, but, like, what are you talking about pigeonholing? Are you saying, like, everyone who picks a class in a game is the same as everyone else who picks that class? Because that's not really true. There are some games where that is basically more or less true, and we've talked about it before, like your World of Warcraft. Like, everyone who is a fighter has all the same skills as all the other fighter warriors or whatever they're called. But there are other choices, and in World of Warcraft they are very minor, but in other games there are major choices you can make, like your Neverwinter, for example, which does use a Dungeons & Dragons system. Everyone who stays pure fighter will have basically the same abilities, but then you have like your feats and skills and talents and things like that, which diversify your character and your background and your race, example, or give you other options as well. If you're worried about being the same as the person next to you, then that's fair, but then pick a game that gives you more diversification.
The problem I have with that is then in the early stage of the game, yes, you can make all these choices later on, but it's still within that same pigeonhole. So I've started a monk character in Diablo and I've got him all the way up to level 70, and then it's like, oh, I wish I could really use, some of these wizard abilities. I have no choice to do that. I've made this option. I can't, choose to sacrifice 20 levels of my character and then become a wizard. I have to start all over again, pick a wizard, and then I got the same problem there, as I can then only use wizard abilities. I can only learn wizard things. I'm sure the wizard in that game, who is a badass, can figure out some of the witch doctor's stuff. Unless there's some story reason as to, why you won't use voodoo dolls and stuff. Why do these things have to be so defiantly separated? Why can't there be some crossover? And I realize in some games that there are, but I think class systems as a RPG trope, some game companies or some games use this as an excuse to prevent some of the harder choices that they would have to implement in terms of game mechanics.
Well, I can sort of see where you're coming from, but like using Diablo as an example, your character that you're playing, you're supposed to be playing this one character, the Nephilim, who's you're leveling up and is acquiring all these awesome abilities based on how they were before the game occurs. You don't start off just as the person walking out of the village in Diablo. You start off as actually not a hero, but at least an accomplished adventurer along that path, and you only get better over time as your Nephilim abilities unlock. But what you're talking about, like, you want your monk to learn like some wizard skills, what you're really saying is you want to like have your monk pick up some of the awesome wizard skills and get the benefits of both and try and avoid the penalties of either. That's what's called balance. If anyone could do that and pick up all skills from every class, everyone would just pick what is objectively the best skills from every class, and everyone would end up being the same anyway because they would be the one best way to play your character, and you just get rid of all the crap skills that no one uses anymore.
But that's the problem with RPGs in general, is typically there is just the best build within your class. What I would say balance is having no objectively best skill at all. So there would be no trade-offs within classes. There would be trade-offs across these class-like tropes that if I wanted to pick up one of the wizard skills, then and it in some way conflicted directly with one of my monk skills, then I couldn't have both. I would have to choose one to learn. For instance, if you're a wizard and you went to learn witch doctor skills and you start using this voodoo-esque magic, then some of your more powerful pure arcane abilities would be weaker because you're splitting yourself across these two arcane arts.
But then again, it's still exactly the same problem. You're talking about these cookie cutter builds where there is objectively sort of the best way to play every class. If abilities were opened up like that, there would still be objectively the best way to play from that entire pool of abilities. So you'd still have exactly the same problem. There'd just be more abilities to filter through and figure out which is the best, and everyone would still end up playing these same cookie cutter builds that are the best.
That's more of a generic problem in game design, though, is that they can't get balance right because it's really hard, and I understand that. But at least then you'd have more choice. Like Diablo, all the guys on the forum keep talking about how we want it to be balanced and we want you to choose your style of play. Well, my style of play would be to have a sword and shield, and then when all my gear becomes degraded, I whip out my staff and then start stabbing people with black holes and things like that. And so I can't play my way. I want to be, a spell warrior, and they don't want to give me a class for that, or they don't want to allow me to have those options because they claim, and probably rightfully so, that it would make balance more difficult. So are we just using class systems to pigeonhole off different sets of skills so they only have to balance a smaller number of skills at any one time, or are they actually serving a real purpose other than forcing you to have to play the game 5 times to play all 5 classes?
Well, and that's the thing. People will preference one class over the other, and it does have a mechanical difference and a programming difference as well. Like, there are classes which the 2 classes that cover each primary attribute, and so they need to have those diversifications because one person might like playing as your barbarian guy who runs in and chops people with swords, and another person might prefer to play as the wizard who sits back and shoots things from afar, and that's just their preference. If all skills were available, they could still do that, but the bleed over makes it extremely difficult to balance and actually make a game worth playing. It makes them able to split up the plays into their preferred play styles and give them unique class items and skills that aren't available to any other combination.
So that to me just sounds like an excuse to make their lives slightly easier. I mean, I prefer to play a class. I prefer my Demon Hunter, and I think that's because the systems exist, and to some extent we've sort of just accepted it. I think without those systems and opening it up so you can do a lot more, I think it would give players a chance to create far more interesting builds and do far more interesting things. So it's not just going to be, what class do you play? Oh, Demon Hunter. Oh yeah, fair enough, I played that for a while. It could be, people would actually start talking about the individual skills. You wouldn't be segregating communities of people who only hang out in the Demon Hunter forums or only hang out in the Monk forums. Everyone will be getting together talking about the best skill combinations, the best passive skills that go with the best active skills and things like that. You'd have a lot more diversity, and I think a much bigger sense of community if you weren't just carving people out into class groups.
But then again, if that's balance is the problem, if all of the classes were balanced and all the abilities were balanced, then it wouldn't matter which class you picked. You could pick the one which you like the look of or like the play style of the best, and they would all perform equally. It shouldn't be that there are no classes, because then everyone is in the same boat. That segregation, I think, is crucial to the storytelling of the game, and it's not necessarily a segregation where you put away one group where they're bad, where that might be the case because balance is off in the game. But if everyone is made equally, and it's an ideal world and it's never going to happen, but then it wouldn't matter what you played as or what skills you picked. You were valuable, and you could play the game as the class you liked, using the abilities you liked, and still perform well.
That would be the same argument that I would have, though, is that if all the skills were balanced, then you don't need to choose a particular class. I understand it for storytelling reasons, and I think that's an acceptable reason to potentially have classes, because you can give them a far more intricate backstory. It's not like Jimmy just grew up and he was good at everything. Yay, Jimmy. Is you could actually have, if all the skills were balanced across the entire system, and then you could just pick the skills that were interesting to you instead of just picking the class that was interesting to you and then only being able to use their subset of 10 skills. If it was perfectly balanced, and we all know it'll never happen, you would then be able to choose from 40 skills for your character instead of just the 10 from that class that you chose. I think you could do away with that second level of decision making by having to pigeonhole yourself early on, and instead just have all the skills open and work on balance across the board instead of just within classes.
We've sort of spoken about it there as well. It's a decision that you need to make. If you want to play as a barbarian who can call down an avalanche from the heavens sort of thing and to crush his foes, then you need to pick a barbarian. What you're talking about is actually removing choice in a way, because when you make that choice, it does limit you. And yes, it is a limit, but it means you and only other members of your class can use those abilities. You're sort of rewarding for specialization, I'm trying to say. But if you take away classes and all abilities are open, then there's no reward for specialization and going a dedicated path down, like as a barbarian or as a witch doctor, etc.
Screw you, wrong, and I hate you.
What you're talking about is a game that doesn't let you benefit from specializing. And the Secret World tried to do it where you can learn every ability, but to get the elite skills from every class, you had to push down and take lots and lots of skills down that particular magic system, and then you could get like the elite skill from that ability. Whereas if you specialized across several, you'd get the low level abilities of several, but never the best abilities of anything. And so even in that system, people don't just generalize across all systems, because it's not the best way to play.
Stop being right. It's hurting me.
Well, you just admit you're wrong.
You're still wrong, and I hate you. And I suppose I can accept it on that sense that it can be important in a way of providing an opportunity cost. If you pick this class, it's a huge decision. I suppose it's something they want to weigh on you heavily, but I would still prefer something more natural, where you're not just making one giant decision at the start that impacts the rest of the game. I think it'd be far more natural if you weren't picking a class and then you were making a lot of smaller decisions along the way that lead up to, at the end of the game, you've essentially become a class. But I think it's far more natural, instead of at the start saying, I'm a barbarian, eventually I'll be able to do all these awesome things. I think along the way, if they help let you make choices that guide you into a specific class, like as you go along, the skills you choose and the path you take and the weapons you use are essentially making you a brute force style character, is that will lead up to eventually being able to call down an avalanche from the heavens and destroy your enemies, because you're a cool barbarian and you focused on those things as you made these 20 or 30 little decisions along the way, instead of just making your one huge decision at the very start and then just sort of having to live with it as you go through the game.
Right, I can sort of see what you're saying. So what you're talking about is, instead of picking a class, you'd like to be able to pick roles, and not even necessarily one choice for the entire game. Like as you level up, like let's say there's a game with 50 levels, and every 5 levels you get to pick an extra tier of role, like whether you're doing melee DPS or tank or healing or whatever, and each level of that role you pick up lets you get better and better abilities within that, but it allows diversification. So you could have, as you said before, your sword and board warrior who, when things get tough, could pull out his stave and start black holing people to death, but you'll never get to the upper echelon of either, because you have to learn 2 different skill sets, which, as in like real life, if you dedicate your life to one skill set, you can become a master of that. But if you try to dedicate yourself to multiple things, you'll sort of become a jack of all trades and a master of none, as the saying goes.
Yeah, and I think that would make a more natural game experience and let you have more decisions throughout the game, instead of just removing, in the instance of Diablo, you're removing 4/5 of all the potential decisions by making you have that class choice right up front. Whereas instead, if you could sort of make choices as you go, every decision that you make as you go along has a heavy opportunity cost, because you're blocking out more and more decisions as you go, and you're like, oh, you know, I really want to specialize. I want to get up and be able to be a master mage and to be able to tear open the fabric of time and space and destroy my enemies, but also kind of want to swing a two-handed sword and, you know, cut people in half. So you've really got to make that decision as you go as to whether you want to get better at what you're currently doing, if you're enjoying this playstyle, or if halfway through you're like, screw this noise, I want to start using magic, and I want to use a little bit of both. I think it just makes a more natural character progression system.
So I think that sort of system could be very good. I think it could cause some problems, like you'd have your min-maxers who would dedicate themselves up one path to get the ultimate or elite abilities, as sort of what I was talking about before, but there should be sort of benefit as well to, for lack of a better term, multi-classing or multi-rolling. Like there are certain abilities and buffs that are only available if you diversify across several roles. That way it sort of balances out across whether you choose to be pure or choose to be hybrid.
Yeah, and I think that would make a far better game than what I think is just a very lazy thing of just implementing a class system and saying you pick a thing and be that forever. I think that's old. I think it's bullshit, and I think there are better ways of doing it despite not having all the answers. Although I think the main problem, and the one thing that we can agree on in this, is the difficulty comes from balancing it.
Correct. Yeah, it would have to be very, very finely tested and very, very finely tuned to even be a system that you could even try to implement. But I think that is a system that I think after all this discussion, you and I can agree that would be sort of like a quotation marks ideal sort of system that we would like to see games move towards, instead of, like, I see the benefits of classes and I see the benefits for storytelling and ability segregation, etc., but I also see absolutely the benefit of choice, and that's why I like your games like your Skyrim and that sort of thing, where you can pick and choose what you want and how you want to be.
Yeah, and I think just in order to make a better game, you need to have more choices all the way through, instead of almost having a climactic choice right near the start and then everything else is sort of just little bits on top of that. I think it should build up the other way, so that every choice you're making is building up, and then at the very end you're essentially going into this final boss battle, or your end result max level character is this class, and you may not even realize that was the class you were building. You might end up as a mage just because you happen to be picking arcane skills all the way through, when at the start you might have picked a warrior because you thought that was better. And I think it would just provide a better experience in terms of role-playing, that you're making little decisions. Because in life, and it does happen, you don't have to decide your whole life at the very beginning. Most schools and things and whatever force you to, but you can change. You can pick to be other things, and you can diversify, and that has certain perks and drawbacks. And I think it would just make a more natural experience if we got away from pigeonholing systems, I'll call them, in RPGs.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting way that I'd like to see someone give this a go, but it's such a hard system, as we've discussed, to sort of implement and balance, that I think it's a long way down the line, if at all, that we'll get to see this sort of system.
I just got the feeling, I wonder if that's what Blizzard is trying to do with Titan.
I couldn't comment. I don't work for Blizzard.
Well, it's true. It's taking them forever, and, you know, they mentioned recently they cocked it up and sort of had to start all over again because it wasn't going the way they like. I wonder if they did attempt to try and create the kind of RPG without all these tropes and these genre-defining systems, and try to create something generally new. Because I'm thinking, if anyone could pull it off, surely it'd be Blizzard, right?
Well, time will tell, won't it?
You non-committal prick.
Well, but I see what you mean, because they are constantly at war with their player base in World of Warcraft, for example, trying to balance all the abilities and balance all the spells and making them so they feel unique, but there's also an overlay, so if you don't get one class, you can always take another class, whereas it's exactly as we've been saying, maybe they're going to go from the other direction, and you just pick the sorts of skills and stuff you want to use, and you eventually get a class.
All right, I'm putting it out there. Blizzard, do that. It'll be a thing. It'll make money.
Yeah, take all of our money.
They can't take all of my money. I don't have any.
Yeah, I don't have any money either. I live by myself. Rent's expensive.
That's right. We're going to make a PayPal donation thing. Donate to us so we can continue this podcast.
Yeah.
Beg.
Yeah, donate to our rent fund.
Yeah. I don't think anyone's going to do that. And I'm not going to set up PayPal. So instead, if you want to support us, you can subscribe to our feed thing over at iTunes, and you can help us stay on the new and noteworthy page thing section for as long as we possibly can. Tell your friends, get on social media and do all that sort of stuff that I don't particularly understand or like or agree with. I will, however, admit that I've been trying to use our Twitter feed, and every time I do, I make a typo. I apologise for that.
Yeah, it's all Tolly's fault.
It really is. I'm so sorry. This is why I don't use social media, because I don't proofread anything I write, and it just turns into a debacle.
Yeah, he asked me to correct it, and I generally don't, because I like the world to see his failures.
That's right. So I'm going to go with plausible deniability. I don't use social media, so any mistake is typically non-lethals, and only his.
I disagree. But yeah, follow us on the Twitters. We're at Nerds at Night. You can on the Facebook at Nerds at Night Community, and we're on YouTube and, as you said, iTunes. You can subscribe to our feed, and we're on a couple of other podcast directories and things as well. And we know we spoke a few weeks ago about us doing some game streaming recording things, and that is coming. Fear not, but it is not here yet.
That's right, it was coming, and we were so close until someone, who will remain nameless, made a somewhat critical error, and we lost about an hour and a half's worth of work. So it's still coming. Bear with us. When it does come, it will be epic.
Yes, it will be worth the wait.
In the meantime, I just want to take a second to say thanks again, seriously, all you guys, for listening in. If you've got any comments on the show, got any ideas, you want to get on, get involved, any of that sort of shenanigan, drop us a line. We'd love to hear from you. And yeah, just keep supporting us every way you can with your subscriptions and your messages.
Yeah, keep telling your friends to listen in. We appreciate every new listener, so welcome to all of our new listeners, and thanks for hearing us rant about things. And yeah, get involved. If you have a topic you want us to discuss, or you'd like to be on the show itself, get in touch with us on Facebook or Twitter, and we'll find a way to make it happen.
That's right. Do those things. In the meantime, I'm Tully.
I'm Non-Lethal.